Back to action on this weekend's What About Nutrition show on Westplex Radio with our friend and nutrition specialist and expert, Mr. Nutrition himself, Mr. David Gall of O'Fallon Nutrition. Now, they're located over by, what is that, Fort Zumwalt Square?
Yeah, Fort Zumwalt Square. It's on Veterans Memorial Parkway, which is the South Service Road to Highway 70. Mm-hmm. We're about 6 blocks west of K. On Veterans Memorial Parkway. We're in a strip mall that includes JJ's Restaurant in one corner, and there's a 24-hour animal emergency clinic in the other corner a lot of folks are familiar with. Right across the street from Culligan Water in O'Fallon.
Absolutely. Well, it's a great location. I've been there, and there's so much expertise, and one of the things about this show every weekend on our stations that I think is important is you can go into Costco or you can go to some of the big box stores and get supplements, and they're all very commercial and everything like that.
Right.
But you're not going to get the help that you need, and this show is part of the help to your customers. I know you put this in your newsletter, so we welcome all the people tuning in for that. But it's a great service. I mean, the kind of expertise they get from O'Fallon Nutrition.
Yeah, it's an example of what we are trying to do, and with shows like this, we're trying to educate folks in safety and things they should be aware of with their natural products, and things that frankly a lot of the bigger industrial companies that even make things like vitamins and minerals don't always pay attention to. There's a lot of factors there with toxicity that we can try to avoid.
Absolutely. Let's get back. We're talking about oils. We were talking about popcorn in the movie theaters. I think some of them did kind of go to you say there's 2 types of coconut. One's bad, one's good.
That's true, and we're going to get to that a little today.
I'll turn it back over to you then.
So they tend to use your classic movie theater butter that we were talking about is basically typically a hydrogenated oil, often a hydrogenated coconut oil, or another vegetable oil that's been hydrogenated. That's where they expose it to hydrogen under high levels of heat. Now, all of these things are damaging to an oil in the first place. Heat, light, oxygen, all of those do things to the oil that either make it more toxic or remove healthy constituents of the oil. Then when we run hydrogen through it, basically it alters the chemistry of the oil in ways that we haven't even described yet. So there are scientists out there, for example, that get into the issues of these chemicals that are created, things like monomers they're called, and other things that I don't fully understand. But suffice to say, whenever they do studies on them, they turn out to be not so good for us. Now, there are some movie theaters that actually use real butter that's been heated in liquid. I think there's a chain called Landmark Theaters in St. Louis that I have no association with, but I like independent movies and they show them. They have real butter. So we should give a shout out to companies like that they're actually paying more for that product, I guarantee it. And I mentioned in the previous segment that oils like canola and soy oil and corn oil and vegetable oil are not so good. You know, canola oil was renamed. There's no canola plant. Canola oil is something called rapeseed oil.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't want to, you say rapeseed, and that's why it's called canola oil.
It sounds evil.
Right, it sounds evil. And it was a marketing thing to call it canola oil. And it is technically cholesterol-free and trans-fat-free, but it's also inflammatory because it's an omega-6 oil. And the issue is balance between omega-6s and omega-3s in our diet. Yes. And I won't fully get into that today. There's another segment or another show we're going to talk about that. But when we consume large amounts of these polyunsaturated omega-6 oils, which are basically all these variations on vegetable oil, they contribute humongous amounts of omega-3s, which is like loading up one side of the teeter-totter with bricks. So if you think of our balance of omega-3 and omega-6s, it's just like balancing 2 kids on a teeter-totter. On one side, we've got 5 or 6 kids from all these omega-6 fats. So we've got the canola oil we cooked with. We've got the salad dressing that we've ate. We've got the the oils used at the restaurant, which are almost always these omega-6 oils. So we've got 5 or 6 kids on one side of this teeter-totter representing the omega-6s, and on the other side of the teeter-totter representing the omega-3s, we've got like one little 2-year-old on that side. You know, so he's way down. When we take an omega-3 supplement or when we consume flaxseed oil at home, we're adding to that side. But here's the point I want to make. This is what today is about. We can take kids off of the overweighted side. Okay? So there are alternative oils that are actually more nutritious and often taste better that we can use for cooking or things like salad dressings that don't necessarily contribute huge amounts of omega-6. Or, like I had mentioned earlier when we talked a little bit about how oils are manufactured in this country and in other industrialized countries, we can actually avoid things like the hydrogenation process and bleaching and peroxides and hexane. We can avoid having those things come to the party as well, not to mention the destruction of healthful constituents of the oil like omega-3 fats or lecithin or, vitamin E. We talk about
Yeah.
fat-soluble vitamins.
Sure do.
Vitamin E is totally destroyed by heat. So let's get into some good oils. You want to cook with fats that don't contribute to inflammation or toxicity. That's the point we've been making, but they still tolerate heat well, because that is one of the benefits of this, vegetable oil, canola oil, peanut oil, shortening even. They tolerate heat well, right? So one oil I want to point out, macadamia nut oil. Macadamia nut oil is one of the ideal cooking oils. It's actually higher in the same type of fat found in olive oil, which is called omega-9 monounsaturated fat. But macadamia nut oil tolerates heat much better than extra virgin olive oil. And briefly, I got to hit this. Extra virgin olive oil, despite what every television chef says, is not suitable to sautéing, frying, or other high heat methods of cooking. Rachel Ray is completely misinforming people about this. I think they're great for promoting using real oils, but extra virgin olive oil has a really low smoke point that it gets burned at. Its smoke point is right around 300 degrees. Okay, when people cook, they're cooking at higher than 300 degrees in their saute pans, for example, and you can see this oil smoke. Okay, when it's smoking, it's oxidizing. All of its healthy properties are getting destroyed.
Wow.
And without getting deep into it, remember a couple weeks ago we did the show on grilled meats and the HAAs, heterocyclic aromatic amines created that are bad for you? Okay. Well, when you overcook oils, things like that, not exactly the same thing, but processes like that happen, and long story short, you make toxins. So you don't want to burn your oil. Macadamia nut oil, despite being even higher in monounsaturated fat than olive oil, has an official smoke point of 413 degrees. Depending on who pressed it, it's about 400 to 450 degrees. Plenty for sautéing in a pan without creating toxic substances. And I don't think I really have to do that much convincing that macadamia nut oil tastes really good.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine? You cook fish in macadamia nut oil. It's incredible.
Yes.
You saute vegetables in it. It's awesome.
So it's a good. It's probably a little more expensive.
It's a little bit more expensive, but it's worth it. I mean, otherwise you're buying oil that you're burning in your pan before you consume it, which is creating toxic
That explains
poisons.
why my mother, back in the 70s, was making Italian chicken with the virgin olive oil that she got on the hill here in St. Louis and took back home to Indiana because we had the stations out here. And it was always had this little crispy stuff laying around inside by the chicken. That
Sure, some of that might have been, burnt oil.
Yeah, burnt oil, yeah.
And there's going to be some folks out there that really know their fats that are going to be saying, but hey, Dave, what about normal, not extra virgin olive oil or olive oil simply labeled as olive oil? That is true. Those versions of olive oil tolerate heat better. But the reason I make such a big deal about this is because all anybody talks about these days, especially on TV, is extra virgin olive oil. And it is in particular extra virgin olive oil that does not tolerate high heat. Another good fat. We talked about coconut oil a little bit. There's a substance called unrefined extra virgin coconut oil. This oil's smoke point is 350 degrees, so it's still suitable for baking and things like scrambling eggs. Now, virgin coconut oil is actually a representative of the healthy saturated fats. These include saturated fats called short and medium chain saturated fats. And basically, the body typically uses those for energy over storage, and they're far less likely to do what they call aggregate, which means to clump up, than long-chain saturated fats, such as those found in shortening or lard. So
Which
this
is bad for your arteries and your heart.
Exactly. So this is the big distinction. We always hear saturated fats are bad for us. There's different types, and like anything, there's good ones and bad ones. And so things like unrefined virgin coconut oil represent the medium-chain saturated fats. It's actually in studies extraordinarily difficult unless you get major excesses to store these fats as body fat.
Right.
So wouldn't you rather cook with a fat that's hard to store as body fat rather than easy to store as body fat?
Yes.
Some people employ them in low-carb diets for energy, for example. And it's a great substitute for things like lard or shortening because extra virgin coconut oil is actually solid at room temperature, but it melts at about 78 degrees Fahrenheit, which means it would be liquid inside of our body. I also want to point out, and this is a huge connection today, when we eat excess carbohydrates, they convert into a certain kind of fat. They convert into long-chain saturated fats, the same types of really bad fats that contribute to platelet stickiness. We talked about clumping. Those are the fats that contribute to our platelets clumping up, which is what then leads to things like strokes and heart attacks.
Okay.
So we want to have fewer of these fats that we consume that are clumpy, and we don't want to make them in our own bodies from excess sugar. So if you want another reason to worry about why excess sugar and carbohydrate can be bad, it's because you make long-chain saturated fats that contribute to clumping of your platelets.
Just another thing on my list here. Let me write this down.
That's right. It's worth it. There's a lot of studies on unrefined virgin coconut oil that have shown that it may encourage loss of body fat. There's studies that indicate it may improve thyroid function. And it's a source of a substance called caprylic acid, which is a 8-carbon little fatty acid known to kill yeast and fungi in the body. When these yeast incorporate these specific types of caprylic acid into their body, when they eat it, basically, it causes them to rupture and die. So it's a great way to deal with some microorganisms in your body as well. And I'd also like to throw out, because a lot of people use it for this, unrefined coconut oil is great on the skin as well, like as a massage oil. Some other healthy oils that you can consider using occasionally are almond oil, sesame oil, grapeseed oil is a great one. These tend to have higher smoke points as well, especially almond and grapeseed oil. They're, in the case of grapeseed oil, very neutral in flavor. So I like grapeseed oil and macadamia nut oil for cooking. You can still use extra virgin olive oil. You just don't want to go above 300 degrees. And the trick here, folks, is to purchase oils that are manufactured under the right conditions. Minimum exposure to heat, light, air. You want to look for terms like cold pressed, unrefined, or information on a bottle where the company really goes to lengths to convince you they didn't use too much heat. If it's not, if the oil is clear, totally clear, has no taste, etc., it's probably been exposed to some of these harsh methods. Your oil should have a little bit of taste. It does cost a little bit more, but it's worth it. You want light-resistant bottles. You want them nitrogen flush so there's no oxygen in there. And look for oils with expiration dates. If there's no expiration date, it's been processed to the point that it'll never go bad, which means it's already not good for you.
Oh, fascinating show. And we are out of time, unfortunately. David, great show. Great show once again. There's so much wealth of information that you do have. Mr. Nutrition, David Gall, owner of O'Fallon Nutrition in O'Fallon, Missouri. And we can find it on the web at www.o'fallonnutrition.com. O'fallonnutrition.com. And so that's it for today. I'll tell you what, we'll see you next week.
Thanks a lot. Have a great weekend, everybody.
All right, same time, same station as we are, the radio station getting it done for the Westplex. What About Nutrition with David Gall? I'm Steve Casper. We'll see you next week.